All right, let's get right into it. For years, we've all been hearing this story, right? That big data is the new oil, this amazing force that can predict pretty much everything, from what you're going to buy next to who you'll vote for. It's sold to us as this promise of a super efficient, super insightful world. But what if that's not the whole story? What if it's way more complicated? And that's the big question we're going to tackle. We're going to peel back all those layers of hype and get to the real heart of what big data can actually do. And maybe more importantly, what it can't. So let's get started. So, first things first. To really understand the problems, we have to get a handle on the promise. I mean, why did big data become such a huge deal in the first place? Well, a lot of it comes down to something people in the industry call the 5 V's. And what's so interesting here is that big data isn't just about volume, the mind-boggling amount of information. It's also about velocity, the insane speed at which it's all being created. Then you've got variety, because it's coming from everywhere. Social media, your phone, sensors, you name it. But then you have to ask about its veracity, like how true is any of it? And finally, the whole point is to find the value, the actual insight hidden in all that noise. It's this messy, complex mix that makes it so powerful, but also so risky. And that right there brings us to our first huge challenge, what I like to call more data, bigger blind spots. See, there's this core belief that's been driving the whole industry, the idea that more data is always better. But as we're about to see, that is a seriously flawed assumption. Yeah, this is the big one. This is the foundational myth of the whole big data craze. The thinking goes something like this. If you just collect a massive amount of information, all the little biases and errors will just kind of cancel each other out, right? And you'll be left with the pure objective truth. It sounds great in theory, but reality tells a very different story. So here's the real kicker. A huge data set is not automatically a representative one. Think about it. If your way of collecting data has a built-in flaw, getting more data doesn't fix the flaw. It just makes the flaw bigger. It just amplifies the bias and gives you this false sense of confidence in a totally skewed result. And this is a perfect example. You could scrape every single tweet ever tweeted. You'd have an enormous data set. But what does it actually represent? It's definitely not the general public. It's a very specific group of people who choose to be on that platform, and they often perform for an audience. Using that data to understand public opinion is like trying to understand a whole city by only listening to the people shouting in the town square. You're going to get a pretty weird picture. And look, this isn't just some abstract, high-level problem. It gets personal, really personal. Let's talk about the digital caricatures that algorithms are building of every single one of us, often with, well, some pretty strange results. Get this. This is a fantastic real-world example. A lecturer checked their own Facebook ad profile, and this is what they found. The algorithm thought they were into gardening. Nope. And it was convinced they were a potential customer for US car dealerships, even though they didn't even drive. It just goes to show you how these automated systems can be so opaque and, frankly, just plain wrong. Okay, so you might be thinking, all right, the data can be flawed, but surely the patterns it uncovers must be meaningful, right? Well, not so fast. This brings us to the second major problem with big data, confusing correlation with causation. Big data systems are absolute beasts at finding patterns. Seriously, machine learning can sift through billions of data points and spot connections that a human being would never, ever see. But here's the thing. Finding a connection, a correlation, is not the same as understanding what it means. Take this famous and honestly kind of hilarious example. For decades in parts of Europe, the number of storks and the number of human babies born followed the exact same rising trend. A perfect correlation. So does this mean storks deliver babies? Of course not. We know that's silly. There was a third hidden factor, in this case industrialization, that was causing both things to rise at the same time. And that really hits the nail on the head. Data doesn't tell you why something is happening, it just tells you what is happening. Without actual human knowledge and critical thinking to dig in and find that why, these patterns can be super misleading. Here's another perfect example of that trap. Let's say mobile phone data shows you spend 8 hours a day physically near your colleagues and only 3 with your spouse. The data itself is accurate, but the conclusion it seems to point to, that you care more about your colleagues, is completely wrong. It misses the entire human context of what work is, what family is, and what those relationships actually mean. So far, we've talked about flawed data and misleading conclusions. Annoying, for sure. But what happens when these systems are used to make really high-stakes decisions about people's actual lives? This is where the risks go from being interesting to being genuinely dangerous. This might be the biggest, most dangerous myth of the whole big data story. The idea that a computer program is somehow neutral or objective. But algorithms are built by humans. They're trained on data collected from our messy, biased world. So they don't just reflect our biases, they can actually amplify them and automate them on a massive scale. Let's look at a real case study. A model was developed to predict pickpockets on the subway, and it boasted this really impressive number, a 93% accuracy rate. Sounds great, right? I mean, who wouldn't want to stop crime with that kind of precision? But hold on. When you actually dig into what that number means, the reality is shocking. That accuracy rate meant that for every 14 people the system flagged as a potential criminal, only one of them was actually a pickpocket. That means 13 innocent people were wrongly identified. Now ask yourself, are you willing to be one of those 13? Because this is what it means to be a false positive. You're not just a statistic. You're a person who's now been algorithmically labeled a risk. And that can lead to very real-world consequences, especially for people who already face more scrutiny. It's not just a data error. It's a potential injustice waiting to happen. So what's the solution here? Is it just about getting more data or building better algorithms? Well, not exactly. The biggest hurdles, it turns out, often aren't technical at all. They're human. Even when good, solid data exists, it so often goes unused. You've got managers who'd rather trust their gut instinct than a finding that contradicts what they already believe. You've got crucial data trapped in different departments that don't talk to each other. And sometimes organizations just have a powerful incentive to ignore inconvenient data, like when a company finds out its own product might have problems. And this right here is what this is all about. This is the main takeaway. Data is not some raw, objective truth that falls from the sky. It's a product of human choices. What we decide to measure, how we measure it, and how we choose to interpret the results. It requires critical human judgment every single step of the way. So how can we all be a little bit smarter about this? Well, here's a simple framework. The next time you're presented with a big claim that's based on the data, just ask yourself these questions. Who collected this data and why? What context am I missing here? Is this a real cause and effect relationship or just a coincidence? And finally, is the system that's using this data transparent and fair? Because ultimately, every dataset, every algorithm is telling a story. It's telling a story about our society, about our communities, and about you personally. The most important thing to remember is that these stories aren't just happening to us. They're being actively written. So the real question we all need to start asking is, who's holding the pen? And are we okay with the story they're writing?